Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. First, Mr. Deasy, I want to maybe just make an encouragement, if you will. I know you're probably all familiar with the fact that Grand Forks Air Force Base recently was named a Global Hawk base. Of course, it's had Global Hawks for some time, but now a reconnaissance wing. The Grand Forks Air Force Base, once a large tanker and bomber base, leased out a good chunk of that base to the county, who then leased it out to the Grand Sky UAV Park. Our North Dakota Army National Guard, or Air National Guard, I'm sorry, has an ISR mission. The result of that, of course, has been the spawning of incredible research and development and intellectual assets, including the University of North Dakota's Aerospace School, AI Research and Development. They're a company in Fargo, a number of companies. A company in Fargo recently met with some of the folks over at DoD and NASA, a company that does AI research and development called Aperio. I say all that only as a reminder and an encouragement perhaps to everyone listening, but particularly to you, that not all the great new ideas are in the Silicon Valley. And I just would love to encourage you to keep all of that in mind, not just North Dakota, but throughout America, that there are a lot of startups and innovators that oftentimes get left behind as a result of whether it's procurement, and we'll talk about that next, Ms. Hirschman, or other policies, or even just traditions and relationships, and maybe give you a minute or two to respond to that thought and that encouragement.
Senator, I completely agree. When we established the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, one of the foundational principles was talent and where we should go out in industry to seek this. We're developing expertise inside the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center right now that is not only working with large, significant defense players that we have today, we're working with the academic environment, we're working with research institutes, and yes, we are also working everywhere from startups to the established companies in Silicon Valley. One thing for sure about the AI space, if you look at any of the solutions that we've started to roll out today, there's not one or two companies it takes to come up with these solutions, but there's a host of them. And some of these, we may have 6 or 7 companies from well-established to small startups that participate in actually helping develop a solution.
All right, thank you for that, and I want to continue to encourage you in that. Ms. Hirschman, I just want to visit a little bit. Thank you, by the way, for our very good conversation. I was encouraged, and I'm not an auditor and accountant at all, but it does make me happy to see you happy when you hear the word audit, because we have some issues that we need to deal with. But when we met a few months ago, I talked to you about speaking of procurement, the procurement process at the Army Corps of Engineers, particularly as it relates to the building of the wall on the southern border, and I've been concerned about it as a result of a constituent that's in that process, but I've learned a lot more. And recently I've learned a whole lot more because I've gotten a whole lot more information, which was far too difficult to get, I might add. But now that I have, one of the things I've noticed is that the Corps uses this 2-tier process where they first put out a very small number of RFPs to a very small group of builders, quite select, and then and that's irrespective of price or efficiency or anything like that, just design build. Then in the second round, they'll invite like one company to the table, and then they'll negotiate price. And it concerns me a lot that there's such a small group and a very selective process that gets down to just basically a sole source. And I find it hard to imagine that we are getting the best bang for the buck in that type of a process. So I just want to encourage you as well and get your feedback on some possible reforms. And I know that's just one example of one. I'm sure it's applicable in several areas, but just want to encourage you.
Thank you, Senator. And I appreciated our conversation as we spoke. Even the way we scope the outcomes of these contracts can be so narrow and predetermined that we may be overlooking innovative ways to attack a problem. As we mentioned, category management and contract management is one of our largest focus areas for reform. We have 40,000 contracting officers and over 2,000 contracting offices. It is ripe for reform from a process standpoint, from a vendor selection standpoint, from an end-to-end standpoint, and looking at enterprise-wide buys are all part of our reform initiatives, particular to contracts. So I appreciate your ongoing continued encouragement and support.
Thank you. I thank all of you for your willingness to step up and yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.